God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful not to speak either good or bad to Jacob. Now you have indeed gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods? Then Jacob replied to Laban, because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. The one with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what is yours among my belongings and take it for yourself. For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them.
Okay, what verse was that?
32.
32. Okay. Alrighty.
That's what's on the board.
No, we haven't found instructions.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Actually, we're going to look at through verse 30 today. I changed it. But it's okay to read to 32.
Okay.
I was playing with the camera and I kind of lost track here. So. Okay, so by way of review, first of all, last time we looked at this idea that Jacob is on the run, and we're looking at this whole idea of what I called extrusion. That it's interesting. That was one slide from last time. That Jacob is overcome by his greatest fear, Laban, at the very location that he is projecting out as the place of safety, the hills of Gilead. And we looked at this idea that God is in this young. He's not a young man anymore. God is in this man's life. And even though in his cleverness, and we know Jacob is a very clever man, even in his cleverness, God is bigger and has something he wants to do in this man's life. Thus, the irony of actually being overtaken by his greatest fear, this confrontation with Laban, the one he's running away from, in the very place of perceived safety. I think that is so interesting. And then the second thing we looked at last time is the idea that behind the scenes, God is engaged in this man's life, but coming to Laban that very night and said, hey, be careful how you treat this guy. Be careful how you treat him. And it said, in the words, it says, don't speak either good or evil. And I'm interpreting that as just basically, be careful. Be careful here how you treat him. So that's what we looked at last week. And we brought these two together, that God is causing something. God's causing something to happen in Laban's life, and those two components together, which we called extrusion and protection. And then we wrapped up last week where some of you had opportunity to share a story. You really related. You guys really hooked into this whole idea. I know Jeff shared a really, really good story last week about what he and his wife had been through. And then there were, I think, a few others as well, but that one really stood out to me last week. So we're going to continue on with this meeting, and I'm calling this the meeting, Act 1 here, right? Can you guys see that the meeting, Act 1, verses 26 through 32. We'll probably only get through 28 today. He's had 7 days to stew. Imagine the posse in hot pursuit, whatever animals they were riding, and you can just see it, right? Picturing right out of a Western. They are booking it, and they overcome Jacob and his party in 7 days. He's had 7 days to stew about this meeting, about what he's going to say. Now, on the night prior to the meeting is when God visits him and tells him to be careful. So now we're going to see this meeting of father-in-law and son-in-law. So here they are. Here's Laban. Here's Laban coming in. 7 days to stew, and here it goes. Here it goes. Just hear what he says. So that's what we're going to look at. And so here is how I cast it. Verses, we're looking at verse 26 through 28 right down here. So we'll look at that section. That's probably about as far as we're going to get today. And so as I look at the text, he comes to his son-in-law with two questions. First of all, what are you thinking? You know, that's kind of how we cast it. What have you done? Okay. Then in 27, why did you flee? Do you see the two questions here? The what question and the why question. And I'm categorizing those under a heading of which I'll show you in just a minute. And, you know, take a stab. Why would he begin this with a question? What is the purpose of a question?
Download the problem on the other person.
What's that?
To download the problem on the other person.
Yeah, you know, I look at it this way, Carl, is that this is the picture, this is how I've cast this interaction right here. That Laban, this is Laban in this color here, this is Laban and this is, and I'm looking at Laban is posturing himself in a position of power, speaking down to, the whole language here is in a sense speaking down. The situation occasions itself that Laban is in the position of power at this particular moment. Jacob's caught red-handed. Jacob is caught red-handed. And so in this position of power, we look at this, how is Laban speaking to him? And he begins with a question. Carl has brought out that he's casting it onto him. Well, I agree. But I think even more so, there's a reason why a question is used here. And we'll look at it in just a minute. Then it moves across the screen in the next phase here as these move out. I look at these as kind of like parallel statements. It says, why have you deceived me? He ties himself right into it. Why have you deceived me? He uses that again, secondly, why have you deceived me? And then, you did not allow me to give you a proper send-off, and goes and does a great amount of embellishment on this whole thing of what you could have had if you hadn't deceived me. You get the idea? He ties it right back to him, right here in this middle section. I'm going to place a heading under here on each one of these. And then he wraps this whole thing in verse 28. You have done foolishly. You have done foolishly. Okay? Do you see the progression? Starts with a question, and then some terms that, you know, he says, why have you deceived me? Why have you, he ties it right back to him, and then this final statement, you fool. Okay, so this is how I saw it here. Here's the three categories. And this is where I was thinking, Carl, is that the question, the reason he does this question, and I thought of this term dislodging. The idea being that we as human beings, we frame how we think. We are locked into how we think at any given time. We have everything that we know is categorized in nice, neat boxes. And there has to be kind of a shock that comes along to get someone to think differently. Same as when you had teenagers, you go up to Johnny and you say, what were you thinking? Okay? Right, it's the same thing. Is that what were you thinking is to dislodge these categories and get them to move apart. I mean, that's how I'm seeing it. This whole idea of dislodging, a shock treatment, boom, you know, get them thinking differently. So the what and the why, in my opinion, is we don't think about it, we just do it. This is so natural here, what we're looking at, is to dislodge the thinking so that something new can happen. All right, that's point one. Point two is that under this second movement across here, I'm calling this accusation. accusation because it's pointed to Jacob. You did this to me. Nothing like what they teach you under therapy. I know. Is you don't accuse. You say, this is how this action made me feel. That's what we're supposed to do, but he didn't do that. You deceived me. You get it? Accusation. You did not allow me to kiss. You stole from me the ability to kiss my grandchildren goodbye, is what he's saying. Really rubbing it in, accusation here. And then finally, the conclusion of the first two, the dislodgement and the accusations, the conclusion that Laban is pronouncing is, you've acted foolishly. Fool. That word fool. And then look at here. This, ouch. This hurt. This had to hurt.
That's why it's not, those questions aren't questions of inquiry, they're questions of accusation.
Yeah,
Big
I
difference.
think so.
They're just, he already has the answer. Why did you behave like such a jerk is the question.
Yeah.
And so the answer
Yeah.
is, I wasn't a jerk.
But he couldn't use the word jerk because God said don't do that.
Right.
Or knucklehead. I was thinking knucklehead.
Fool's a strong
Yeah.
word.
But he really framed it
Yeah.
wisely. You have acted foolish. I don't think God had an issue with that one.
That's probably true.
I think Laban down deep knew that he had been using Jacob all these years. He knew that in his heart, but here was a way to take the blame from himself and
Yeah.
push it off on Jacob.
And Carl, I couldn't agree with you more that this is human. We're talking about human nature. We're talking about me, and we're talking about you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's this human. Whenever it gets close to me, my comfort level, kind of do the old bait and shift or do the old deflection mode and try to get the monkey off my back. Yes, Alan.
Well, I think Laban was trying to create himself as a victim.
Yes. You're exactly right. Yeah, I think so.
He wasn't really a victim, but
No.
that's what he wanted to portray.
No. He was a much better off financially victim because of Jacob's contribution into his life. Yes.
Well, because I've been gone for 3 months, I have to mention something coming up ahead. I know these are all things to frame Jacob in a defensive position. He puts on the defense. But I think for Laban, this is all flawed. His real anger issue is going to pop up at the end of verse 30. And we won't get there yet, but it's almost like saying, when someone says it's not about the money, no, it's about the money. In this case, it's about my gods. Where are my gods?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
all the rest of this.
Why did you steal my gods?
Yeah, that's what really ticked him off.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Because his gods,
Yeah, the core of his prosperity.
in his mind, I think there were.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's this movement, dislodgement, accusation, and judgment. And this is how, now we're going to dissect these individually, this idea of dislodge. And here's my little picture I had. Here's Jacob's eyeballs looking at life. And the puzzle pieces is that we as human beings have a tremendous ability to categorize and put things in a place of order. And that's because we're made in the image of God. I mean, there's a set of order and really nice framework of how we cast life. And we look at life a certain way. This is the way it is. This is the way it is, okay? Well, I think my feeling is the reason he uses these questions, he didn't think about all this. We just intuitively do this, is that to cause Jacob to look differently. There's his eyeballs now to get him to think about the two puzzle pieces together. Gee, maybe this is to shock him into a new reality. Okay, that's the whole idea of just, we tend to look at things a certain way. These questions were designed to shock Jacob into a new reality. And that's why I call it dislodgement.
It's an intervention.
Intervention.
That's what an intervention
Yeah,
is.
that is what an intervention. You ever been through one of those?
I hope not. I have to-
Oh, they're painful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to tell you about that sometime. Very painful. Been through 2 of them. Okay, so anyway, dislodge, and then the next slide is once he dislodges here, once he dislodges, like this picture here, he actually beats the tar out of it with a hammer. This accusation, you have done this to me. You have done this to me. Just driving it in and beating it with a hammer. There is the idea there. Dislodgement, accusation, which is the beating of the hammer, which is a way of getting the monkey off of my back, is if you can beat the tar out of somebody else. And then finally is this idea of judgment. And here is where this is where we're going to go next time, really interesting. This idea of judgment is the idea of framing something a certain way. He takes this, which was in the previous slide, right here. He takes this and he frames it. He puts a frame around it. A new puzzle piece. Laban is doing this now. Laban is judging, and the act of judging is framing an action in a way that now he's categorizing it. He's doing now exactly what he was trying to dislodge Jacob into thinking. So the idea of judging is to frame it. To frame it, when we judge, we're framing what we're seeing in a certain way. Okay? Then, the last thing I'll go to right now is that the last piece of judging is to categorize it. Where he now takes this, he colorizes it. This is now happening in Laban's head. He's judging it, which has 2 pieces, framing, and then he's now placed this action. He actually prejudged it. He judged it days ago while he was riding. He had this all categorized in his head because he's framed it a certain way. He's framed it a certain way to give reality a certain spin. The very thing he was looking to do to dislodge in Jacob's thinking. Wow! How to take a very simple couple verses and really complicate it, isn't it? Have a great time. We'll end right there. We got a lot more to talk about on this. We're really gonna have some fun with this. So we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yeah. Nobody here next week. And you can come if you want. They don't serve breakfast.